You'd be speaking English by now if you stopped studying the wrong way. 7 months ago, I couldn't put together a single full sentence. And the worst part? I thought the problem was me. I had already tried everything: expensive courses, grammar rules, memorized vocabulary, and nothing worked. But the truth is, the mistake was never mine. The mistake was in the method. And only when I abandoned everything I'd been taught about learning English did I finally start speaking for real. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what I did to go from zero to a point where even native speakers compliment my pronunciation. No living abroad, no magic formulas, just a system that works. If you've ever frozen during an interview, felt ashamed to speak, or you understand everything but can't open your mouth, stay with me till the end, because I'm going to give you, step by step, the path that took me from frustration to fluency. 7 months ago, I could barely put 2 English words together. I'd freeze, stumble, forget even the basics. It was incredibly frustrating. Watching someone speak fluently felt like watching an alien. And there I was, stuck, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. It felt like there was a wall between me and the English language. And no matter how hard I tried to climb it, it always felt too high. I remember avoiding speaking English at all costs back then. I was even embarrassed to repeat simple phrases out loud. And I was trying, watching videos, using apps, signing up for those traditional courses. But I always ended up in the same place. I understood a bit here and there, but when it came time to speak, my brain just shut down. It felt like something needed to click. You know? The worst part? That was the one thing standing in the way of what I'd always wanted: working for an international company as a software engineer. It wasn't just about the language. It was about what it represented. And then, an opportunity came up. One of those you simply can't let slip by. Ever since I started programming, I had this fixed idea: working at an international company. It wasn't just about money or prestige. It was about the experience, the challenge, the chance to really grow. I wanted to be among the best, to be part of massive projects with teams from all over the world. I dreamed of writing code that could impact millions of people, not just in my city or country. Every time I saw a job posting abroad, I'd get butterflies. Something inside me whispered, "That's where you belong." But of course, it wasn't that simple. I knew my technical skills were solid. I studied, practiced, delivered quality projects. But there was an invisible barrier holding me back: English. Imagine that! I could solve complex problems with code, but I couldn't explain them in a conversation. Every time I sent out a resume, I'd secretly think, what if they call me for an interview? Will I be able to handle it? The fear of not being able to communicate clearly was stronger than the fear of technical failure. Still, I kept preparing, kept my GitHub updated, took courses, improved my portfolio, until one day, out of the blue, I got an email that made my heart race. A major Canadian company wanted to interview me. The opportunity I'd dreamed of was right in front of me. And that's when everything started to change, just not in the way I expected. When I saw that email confirming the interview, my first reaction was to celebrate, out loud, alone in my room. I had made it. After so many attempts, ignored applications, sleepless nights reviewing code, someone abroad had finally noticed me. And it wasn't just any company. It was one of the big ones, the kind that shows up in Forbes articles. The kind of place where people build real international careers. It felt like proof that I was on the right path. I spent the next few days laser-focused, reviewed old projects, brushed up on algorithms, studied everything I could about the company. I wanted to show them I wasn't just another random Latin American dev trying his luck. I wanted to impress, but deep down, a part of me was still nervous. Not about the technical test, but about the interview itself. I knew it would be in English, and that kept me up at night. I practiced answers, imagined questions, whispered phrases to myself. But the fear stuck with me. When the day came, it felt like my whole body knew how important it was. I turned on the computer, took a deep breath, joined the call. And then I froze. My English betrayed me. I could hear the questions, but my brain lagged behind. When it was time to respond, the words just vanished. And in that exact moment, it hit me. The problem wasn't my technical knowledge. It was something deeper and much more urgent. The interview was a disaster. Honestly, I don't even like to remember it. In the moment, it felt like everything I knew just vanished from my head. The English sounded distorted, like it was being spoken underwater. I tried to understand, tried to reply, but I stumbled over every sentence. The silence during the conversation was the worst part. That awkward pause when you know the other person is waiting for anything, and you just can't deliver. The sense of helplessness was awful. And it wasn't because I didn't know the content. I realized later that the real barrier was the language. If the interview had been in Spanish, I would have crushed it. But in English, I felt like a lost beginner. I felt small, unarmed, like I was trying to run with my legs tied together. After the call, I shut my laptop and just sat there for a long time. It was a mix of frustration, embarrassment, and anger. But strangely enough, that frustration became fuel. It was in that exact moment that the truth finally hit me. English wasn't just a tool. It was my failure point. That's where I needed to invest, urgently. And the more I remembered that heavy silence during the call, the more determined I became to change. And fast. Only after that interview did I see things clearly. The problem was never my education, experience, or ability to solve problems. It was my English. Just that. Or better yet, all of that. The fluency I thought I had from watching subtitled shows or understanding YouTube tutorials, in practice, it just didn't hold up. It wasn't enough to express myself clearly, confidently, or naturally. It was like owning a Ferrari but not knowing how to drive. And you know what hurt even more? Realizing I wasn't alone. I started talking to other devs from Latin America, and the story kept repeating: super talented people, fully capable, but stuck because of English. The truth is, today, the language that connects the world isn't code. It's English. And if you don't master that, you get left behind. English had become a bridge. And I was still stuck on the other side of the river. From that point on, I started seeing English completely differently. It wasn't a school subject anymore, or just a professional requirement. It was access to everything I wanted. And if I really wanted to cross that bridge, I couldn't keep relying on the same traditional methods that had already failed me over and over. I needed something new, something that actually worked, something practical, simple, and real. At that point, English stopped being just a foreign language to me. It became something much bigger. It was the only way from where I was to where I wanted to be. And it wasn't just about interviews. It was about accessing knowledge at the source, collaborating with people from all over the world, and growing in a real, global way. Every time, I saw an amazing opportunity and read "Fluent English Required." It no longer sounded like a demand. It sounded like a reminder of what I still had to master. That's when everything turned into a mindset shift. I had to stop seeing English as a subject and start treating it like a survival skill. If I wanted to live in this new world, the world of big companies and international projects, I had to speak the language of that world. As simple as that. It was like learning how to breathe underwater before diving deep. Staying in the shallow end wasn't an option anymore. And the more I understood that, the clearer it became that the method I chose would define everything. I couldn't afford to waste time with decorative courses filled with isolated grammar. If English was the key, I needed a system that actually opened doors. And that's exactly when the real transformation began. Before all this, I had already tried the traditional route. Spent a good amount of money on big-name courses. The kind that promise fluency in just a few months. They came with thick books, endless grammar lessons, long vocabulary lists. It all looked great on paper. But in practice, I still couldn't speak. It was like studying every piece of a car without ever learning how to drive. I knew what the present perfect was, but I had no idea how to use it in a real conversation. I followed all the lessons, watched the classes, did the exercises, but something always felt off. Everything was too formal, too robotic. When I tried to apply what I had studied in a real situation, the sentences sounded stiff and unnatural. I felt like I was speaking like a walking textbook. And that's not fluency. That's memorization. And worst of all, the more I studied that way, the less confident I felt about speaking with anyone. That's when it clicked. The problem wasn't English. It was the system. Studying English like math just doesn't work. I needed something alive, direct, connected to real life. A way to learn the same way you learn to ride a bike. By doing, falling, getting back up, and riding again. So I decided to toss everything I thought I knew about studying English and build my own method from scratch. There came a moment when I sat down with myself and got brutally honest. Either I found a way to truly learn English, fast and for real, or I'd keep hitting the same wall over and over. That's when I realized I didn't need more theory. I needed practice. No more studying isolated rules or memorizing word lists I never actually used. I needed a method that would put me in contact with real, everyday English. The kind that people actually speak. I started thinking, how does a child learn to speak? By watching, repeating, making mistakes, and trying again. No grammar explanations, no fear of failure. That thought pushed me to create my own system. One that worked for my rhythm, my goals, and my reality. A system that made me live English every single day. Not just study it for an hour and forget it. No more artificial content. I wanted real English. From movies, the streets, real conversations. That was the turning point. Because once you understand that language learning needs to be built around your actual context, everything shifts. I was no longer trying to memorize. I was trying to express myself. And, curious as I am, I decided to kick off this new journey in a completely counterintuitive way. One that even surprised me. Right at the start, I made a decision that seemed strange, maybe even crazy by traditional learning standards. During the first 15 days, I didn't study any new words. No lists, no flashcards. And you might think, isn't that a waste of time? But honestly, it was one of the smartest things I ever did. I realized the issue wasn't the number of words I knew. It was my inability to actually use the ones I already had. It was like owning a toolbox and not knowing what half the tools were for. Instead, I went back to basics. I focused on the kind of phrases that could actually save me in real life. Those simple but powerful expressions that cover everything in a pinch. I started repeating those phrases out loud, several times a day, until they stuck in my brain. That was the first time English stopped feeling theoretical and started becoming part of my actual routine. No pressure, no overthinking. Just smart, focused repetition. That focus gave me something priceless. Confidence. Little by little, I started noticing that it wasn't vocabulary holding me back. It was unfamiliarity with real sentence structure. And this approach opened my eyes to a new possibility. Maybe I could turn any moment of my day into an English learning opportunity, without classes and without anyone's help. With that new mindset, I went straight to the point. I sat down, grabbed a notebook, and wrote 50 useful phrases. Survival phrases I could use in any situation. Simple stuff, but powerful. Things like, "Can you help me?" "I don't understand. What time is it?" I'm looking for..." Real-life phrases you'd need at an airport, in a store, in a quick conversation. No fancy words or complex grammar. Just the essentials, done right. Each day, I picked a few of those phrases and repeated them out loud. 10 times, no skipping, even if it felt boring, even if I'd already memorized them. Because I knew it wasn't about remembering. It was about automatizing, turning those phrases into reflexes, instant responses. And saying them out loud with natural tone and energy made my brain start accepting English as something familiar. Reading doesn't do that. Speaking does. After a week, I caught myself talking to myself in English without even thinking. If I was washing dishes, I'd say one of those phrases. Walking down the street, I'd say another. It was like English had started to sneak into my daily life without me even forcing it. And that's when I realized I could actually turn my whole routine into a living classroom. After repeating those phrases for days, something just clicked. One day, without really thinking, I caught myself saying out loud, "I'm making coffee." It came out automatically, and that's when I had an idea that would change everything. I started turning my entire routine into a classroom. I began narrating everything I was doing, all day long, in English. Brushing my teeth? I'm brushing my teeth. Leaving the house? I'm locking the door. Simple, even silly, but incredibly effective. By doing that, I began linking real actions to the language. English stopped being just theory on a page and became an actual tool for expression. It was like my brain finally said, "Oh, this is what that phrase means in real life." I started recognizing patterns, repeating structures, and, most importantly, I wasn't translating anymore. The language was becoming part of my reality, not just a mental exercise. This habit became an addiction. Every situation turned into a chance to practice. Even random thoughts I started organizing in English. And yeah, I made mistakes at first. But the key was flow, like training a muscle. And the more I did it, the less English felt like something I was studying, and more like something I was living. That momentum led me straight into the next stage, imitating native speakers, tone, emotion, everything. One day, while watching a series, I noticed how the characters spoke, with rhythm, emotion, even a kind of musicality. And I thought, it's not enough to repeat the words. I need to sound like them. So I started picking 5 phrases a day, from movies, series, interviews, real conversations. But not just any phrases. I chose ones that meant something. Phrases with emotion, with life. The kind you don't just understand, you feel. I took each of those phrases and repeated them out loud, trying to copy exactly how the native speaker said them. The speed, the tone, the rhythm, even the pauses. It felt like acting. And yeah, at first I felt a little silly. But pretty quickly, I realized I was training something way deeper than vocabulary. I was aligning my ears, my mouth, and my confidence all at once. It was like putting English into my body, not just my head. Those repetitions changed everything. When I started speaking with other people, they noticed. "You sound natural," they'd say. And that motivated me even more. It felt like I was picking up a whole new accent, one that brought me closer to where I wanted to be. And this practice, aside from being fun, set me up perfectly for the next phase. Thinking in English, with no mental translation. After 2 weeks of that intense routine, repeating phrases, narrating my day, imitating natives, something strange started happening. I just stopped translating. The sentences came out directly, like my brain had switched to a new channel. I started seeing the world around me in English, thinking in English, and more surprisingly, forming basic sentences without even trying. No more mental delays converting everything from Spanish. It was like learning to drive. At first, you overthink every move. But after a while, it becomes second nature. "Where's the bathroom?" "Well, I'm hungry. I'll call you later." Those kinds of phrases just flowed. And that small progress, which might seem simple to some, was a massive turning point in my journey. I finally felt like I was really speaking, not just studying. From that moment on, it became clear that context-based practice was everything. I didn't need to know 1,000 new words. I needed to master 100 that worked. And as those phrases became automatic, I started creating small dialogues with them, using a method that pushed me to think more flexibly, not just speak from memory. That's when I fully committed to the question and answer method. And honestly, it was a game changer. I started with simple questions like, "What do you do?" or "Where do you live?" Then I'd answer once and again, but adding more detail each time. "I'm a software engineer." Then, "I'm a software engineer from Argentina." Then, "I'm a software engineer from Argentina, and I work with mobile apps." It was like building a staircase toward fluency, one step at a time. This exercise activated my mind in a whole new way. Instead of memorizing ready-made phrases, I was building my own, based on what I actually wanted to say. And every time I repeated them, a new idea came up, a new way to respond. Sometimes I'd surprise myself. It felt like my brain was finally learning to think in English, not just spit out memorized lines from Spanish. And the constant practice showed me something valuable. Fluency isn't about speed, it's about flexibility. Being able to say the same thing in different ways, short or long, formal or casual. That's when I realized that if I wanted to keep growing, I needed to focus more on how I sounded, not just what I said. And that led me to a technique that completely transformed my pronunciation. With the question and answer method part of my daily routine, my brain started doing something I never thought possible. Thinking directly in English. No shortcuts, no translation. It was like my mind had switched channels. Ideas started coming to me already structured in English, without having to pass through Spanish first. And honestly, that was liberating. I wasn't wasting time trying to remember how to say something. I was just saying it. The difference might sound subtle, but it changes everything. When you stop translating mentally, your speech flows. You focus on the message, not the grammar. It's like having a real conversation, not an internal exam. And that gave me a huge boost in confidence. I started expressing myself more naturally, improvising, playing with words. Things I never would have dared try before, out of fear of sounding wrong or weird. This shift taught me something powerful. Fluency starts in your mind, not in your mouth. It's your thinking that needs training, and the speaking follows. That's why the next step in my journey was all about sharpening how I sounded. Not just the content of my speech, but the way I said it. And that led me straight to one of the most effective pronunciation techniques I've ever used. That's when I discovered the echo technique. And honestly, I have no idea why no one had shown me this earlier. The concept is simple, but incredibly effective. I'd listen to a native English phrase, pause the audio, and repeat it exactly the way they said it. Same tone, same speed, same rhythm. It was like becoming a mirror of their voice. At first, sure, it felt awkward. I didn't catch every word. But the point wasn't understanding. It was imitating the sound. I practiced with movie scenes, interviews, even voice notes from fluent friends. I'd repeat each phrase 3 or 4 times until my mouth adapted to the sounds. And the magic was, slowly, my speech started to loosen up. I stopped thinking about pronunciation and started to feel it. It was like singing along to a song. Except this time, I was training for real conversations. After a few days of doing this, I noticed something surprising. My speech sounded a lot more like a native's. Even better. Native speakers started to notice. They said things like, "Your pronunciation is really good." Hearing that from someone born into the language? That's all the validation I needed. But I wasn't done yet. Now that I could speak more clearly, I wanted to grow my vocabulary. And I found a method that made that fun, fast, and super effective. Training with the echo technique became almost a ritual for me. I'd wake up, put on my headphones, and start repeating native sentences with full focus. Listen, pause, repeat. Again, again. And the more I practiced, the more natural my speech became. It was like my mouth was learning how English really sounds. I stopped forcing the words. They just started flowing. The most unexpected part? People started noticing. First, friends who were also learning English. Gabriel, your speaking is different. Clearer, more confident. Then, even strangers, native speakers I met online. They'd say, your pronunciation is really good. At first, I thought they were just being polite, but it kept happening. And when compliments come from native speakers, you feel it. Deep. Those compliments lit a fire in me. Not because I wanted to sound perfect, but because they proved I was finally doing something that worked. When you expose yourself to the language daily, the right way, results show up. And with that renewed confidence, I felt ready to take things further. By building my vocabulary through something completely different. Storytelling. Learning random words never worked for me. I'd forget them the next day or feel unsure about using them. That's when I had an idea. What if I turned every small group of new words into a short story? So I started using what I now call the short story method. Every day, I'd pick 5 new words, not just any words, but ones I could imagine actually saying in real conversations. Then I'd sit down and write a quick little story using all of them. For example, if the words were coffee, cold, late, bus, and forget, I'd write something like, I woke up late, forgot my jacket, missed the bus, and had a cold coffee at the station. Done. A tiny real-life story. And the best part? Context. I'd read the story out loud a few times, as if I were telling someone. And because the sentences made sense, the words actually stuck. It was like my brain finally understood where each word fit. This habit became a personal game. I'd challenge myself to make the stories funny, weird, or emotional, because the more emotion, the more I remembered. And during the day, whenever something similar happened, those words would pop up naturally. This technique didn't just expand my vocabulary. It made me more confident to improvise, to create new phrases. That's when I started doing something else that accelerated my learning even more. Describing the world around me in real time. After creating those mini-stories, I didn't just move on. I lived with them. I read each one out loud, with emotion, like I was telling it to a friend. I repeated them not just to memorize the words, but to train my tone, fluency, and rhythm. And I didn't just read. I imagined the scene, felt the moment, acted it out. Because when you feel what you're saying, English sticks in a whole different way. It moves from memory into emotion, and emotion is unforgettable. But the real magic happened throughout the day. I started hunting for chances to use those new words in real-life situations. If someone mentioned traffic, I'd drop, I missed the bus. If the coffee tasted bad, I'd say, this coffee is cold. Every use was a mental reinforcement. The word stopped being something I had memorized and became something I had experienced. And once you live a word, you don't forget it. This daily practice made me realize that learning vocabulary isn't about how many words you know. It's about how deeply you know the ones you use. 5 words a day, used in meaningful ways, are more powerful than 50 forgotten the next morning. And as those words added up, they started connecting, forming phrases, thoughts, full conversations. That's when I took it even further and began describing everything around me. In English, in real time. That's when I turned the world around me into my personal language lab. I'd walk down the street and quietly narrate everything in English, out loud or just in my head. The sky is cloudy today. That man is walking fast. I'm crossing the street now. It was like I was dubbing my own life in real time. I didn't need a teacher or a classroom, just awareness and consistency. This practice forced me to stretch my vocabulary, to search for words I didn't know how to say. If I saw something I couldn't describe, I'd write it down, look it up later, and add it to my inner narration the next day. It helped my vocabulary grow naturally. through situations I actually lived. Words weren't isolated anymore. They became part of my real-life story, spoken in my voice, with my accent, and no fear of being wrong. The more I did it, the easier it became to improvise during real conversations. My brain was already used to forming sentences, linking ideas, building thoughts. It felt like English had been switched on inside my head, 24/7. And that led me to make a powerful decision, one that changed everything. I made a commitment to speak English every day, no matter what. There came a point when I realized if I truly wanted to take my English seriously, I had to treat it as non-negotiable. No more when I have time or if I feel like it. So I made a radical decision. From that day forward, I would speak English for at least 2 hours every single day. No excuses. No skipping. I made it part of my routine, like brushing my teeth. It didn't matter if it was the weekend, if I was tired or busy. 2 hours was the bare minimum. At first, it sounded like a lot. But when you break it up across your day, it's totally doable. I talked to myself while cooking, walking, showering, replying to audio messages, everything in English. I created imaginary dialogues, told stories, explained my day to myself, all out loud. And the more I spoke, the more my mind opened up. I began hearing myself better, noticing patterns, and, most importantly, correcting my own mistakes. That daily commitment was a turning point, because it wasn't just about the hours, it was about consistency. And consistency is what turns effort into results. Over time, those 2 hours started flying by, and English, which used to feel like an obstacle, started becoming second nature. That's when I felt the urge to dive deeper into how native speakers really build their sentences. And I started noticing the patterns. With so much exposure to the language, I started noticing something. Native speakers didn't talk like the textbooks. They didn't use stiff, overly correct phrases. Everything was more relaxed, more direct, more alive. That's when it hit me. If I wanted to speak like them, I had to understand how they really built their sentences. In real life, not in grammar exercises. So I began paying close attention to the patterns hidden in movies, podcasts, YouTube videos. I started writing down phrases I heard over and over again. I'm about to... let me see. You know what I mean? These expressions that almost never show up in traditional courses, but that natives use constantly. I didn't just memorize these. I tried to break down the logic behind them, how they started ideas, connected thoughts, wrapped up conversations. It felt like I was reverse engineering the language to see how it worked from the inside out. This curiosity made me grow fast. Because I wasn't inventing English, I was modeling real English. And the more I understood these structures, the more natural my own speech became. But there was one part of English that still confused me, even after all this: prepositions. So I decided to tackle them head-on, with a strategy rooted in real-life examples. Prepositions were always one of those details that drove me crazy. In the car, but on the bus? At the party, but in the restaurant? I kept trying to find logic, but English didn't seem to care about logic. So instead of getting frustrated, I decided to take a smarter approach. Every time I came across a confusing preposition, I wrote it down. I made a list just for those tricky expressions and went hunting for real examples. I'd grab clips from movies, series, podcasts, even screenshots of native conversations. I'd study how and where they used each preposition. I learned that often, the choice wasn't grammatical, it was cultural or based on imagery, like on the bus, because you're on a public platform, but in the car, because you're enclosed in a private space. Once I started understanding that through context, everything began to click. And I didn't stop at understanding. I put those examples into practice. I created my own phrases using them, said them out loud, and tried to use them naturally during my day. Over time, the things that once seemed impossible became second nature. That taught me something powerful. In English, context is king. And speaking of context, that's what led me to dive into one of the most complete techniques I've ever used: shadowing. When I discovered shadowing, it felt like I had unlocked a secret weapon for fluency. The technique is simple. You listen to a native speaker and repeat their sentence right after they say it. No pause, no overthinking. You basically become their shadow. At first, I stumbled a lot. Missed words, lost track of the sentence. But I kept going. And the more I practiced, the more my mouth adapted to the real rhythm of English. I used YouTube videos, interviews, TED Talks, anything with clear audio and natural speech. The goal wasn't to understand every word. It was to sound like them. I copied their accent, intonation, pauses, even their little hesitations. And over time, I realized something amazing. It wasn't just my pronunciation getting better. My listening skills were improving too. I could start predicting what they were about to say. The best thing about shadowing is that it forces you to stop being a student and start being a speaker. You're not analyzing, you're experiencing. It's like learning to dance. You don't think through every move. You follow the rhythm. And after a few weeks of shadowing, I gained a level of confidence I'd never had before. And that confidence? It helped me finally overcome my biggest barrier: the fear of making mistakes. For the longest time, my biggest obstacle wasn't English itself. It was the fear of making mistakes. I was afraid of sounding dumb, not being understood, freezing mid-sentence. That fear held me back from practicing the one thing that mattered most: speaking. But eventually I said to myself, you know what? Mistakes are part of the process. And if I don't put myself out there, I'll never move forward. So I threw myself into online conversation groups. At first, I just listened. But slowly, I started speaking. I began preparing topics before each call. I'd write down useful phrases, expressions I wanted to try, ideas I could bring up. It was like preparing for a meeting. I got organized, took a deep breath, and spoke. And yes, I made plenty of mistakes. But here's the thing. No one laughed. No one judged me. In fact, native speakers often helped me. They saw my effort, and they respected it. That's when I realized most of the fear was just in my head. Over time, those conversations stopped feeling like practice. They became real. I wasn't studying English anymore. I was having genuine connections in English. I talked about my day, work, movies, dreams. Fluency became a byproduct. And that insecurity I had in the beginning, it disappeared. Talking to natives became as natural as asking for a coffee. That's when I knew English was no longer a distant goal. It had become a part of me. Now that you've seen the entire journey from zero to fluency, the real question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to keep putting it off? Keep waiting for the right moment? Or are you going to take control of your learning and apply these techniques starting today? I'm no different from you. The only thing that changed was the moment I decided to stop learning English the way everyone else does and start practicing in a way that actually works. And if I made it, so can you. But to get there, you have to make a choice. Will you stay stuck, or will you finally start thinking in English for real? If this content inspired you or opened your eyes in any way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who also needs this breakthrough. Fluency is way closer than you think. It all depends on what you choose to do next.